Hi, James McLean again with FTI Capital Advisors. So one of the most important developments in the growth of the private equity market stretches back to sometime around 1968 with a college kid at Berkeley. His name, Michael Milken. Milken was a middle-class kid from the San Fernando Valley of California. While he was in college, he became intrigued with some of the credit studies that were authored by a guy named Braddock Hickman, who was the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. So while poring over what I imagine were some not-so-fascinating financial reports, he came up with a profound observation. Hickman had pointed out that a portfolio of non-investment grade bonds offered better risk-adjusted returns than a portfolio of investment-grade bonds. What does that mean? It means that the market was mispricing a whole class of securities, and that meant opportunity. The implication of this was profound. Companies and investors had previously stayed far away from non-investment grade bonds, thinking of them as too risky to touch. But Milken identified that the market was mispricing these securities. Yes, they were risky, but the returns offered on these bonds were far greater than the risk should justify. Therefore, this also meant that there was the possibility of developing an entirely new financing market, giving access to capital to companies that previously didn't have it, and facilitating types of transactions that had never before been possible. And that's exactly what Michael Milken went on to do, which is develop the high yield market. He cultivated a universe of buyers for these bonds who could quickly finance large transactions, and also, of course, he made a fortune at Drexel Burnham in trading these securities. Now, of course, later on there were all sorts of problems that ensued that you can read about in books like Den of Thieves and Barbarians at the Gate. But I want to focus on the fact that way back in the 60s, Milken was one of the first to come along to seriously ask the question, does this company have the right capital structure? Could firms be more efficiently financed with debt if there was an active and liquid market for those companies' bonds? And the answer was ultimately yes. Now, this is also where LBOs got a bit of a bad reputation, because in the early days, it really was a lot about financial engineering. The public perception was that guys like Milken were loading companies up with debt that sometimes was not sustainable. And that was certainly true in some cases. And many large buyouts like RJR Nabisco, the companies did indeed go bankrupt. But the core question was a very valid one. Could firms adjust their capital structures using more debt to grow faster? Wouldn't it lower their overall cost of capital? Allow them to get the benefit of the tax deductibility of interest payments versus dividends, and allow them to grow in value? So in the early days, there really was a strong focus on the right side of the balance sheet. This was the theme of many of the early buyouts. But of course, that's just one piece of the equation. Thanks again for listening. You can reach me at james.mclean@fticonsulting.com.